Hello and welcome again to the Talking Guitar Podcast, brought to you by the North American Guitar in Nashville, Tennessee. I am your host, Lindsay Straw, and today we're featuring my chat with luthier Mark Gaiero, whose unique resume includes time spent learning from legendary builders Ervin Somogyi and John Greven, as well as making puppet armatures on a popular stop-motion animation movie. From LA to Portland, Mark's history is a fascinating blend of complementary crafts and disciplines, with everything seeming to dovetail logically into the next project or pursuit. Mark also has a particular focus on using alternative tonewoods, and we dig into this increasingly relevant topic even more too. Be sure to check out our corresponding blog post, which I'll link in the show notes, to see photos from Mark's animation projects, as well as, of course, beautiful photos of his awesome guitars. Please enjoy my chat with Mark Gaiero. Hey Mark, thanks so much for doing this. I'm so excited to talk to you some more about your background with Luthier, as well as everything that you kind of like led you into guitar making. So I guess we'll just go ahead and dive right in and start
thank you
picking
for having me, Lindsay.
Start picking your brain about your background, because a lot of luthiers do seem to have backgrounds in other arts or other fields that are sort of artistically related. But you, I think, are the first one I've met who has a background in film specifically. And I know you've mentioned a little bit about how that sort of got you into woodworking and took you closer to the path of guitar making. But just tell us all about your whole process from film school to now.
Well, I actually studied philosophy in college and had some space to fill when I was coming up to graduation, and took a filmmaking class. The cameras we used were these Bolex 16 millimeter cameras from 100 years ago. I kind of fell in love with the single frame option that camera had, where you could do a frame at a time and do all sorts of experimental type little short movies and stuff like that. After school, I fell in love with it to the point where I decided, I grew up on the East Coast, and I decided I'm going to head out to LA and see if I can get into filmmaking. And so that's what I did. And I was working kind of on a freelance basis, and it ended up being kind of great because you end up on these kind of low budget, no budget projects where you need to be creative with a limited amount of resources. Mm-hmm. And that always kind of stimulates creativity, I feel, when you have like some pretty tight parameters around you. You need to make it work. And so I found myself kind of being drawn to the things on set that I had an aptitude for. And that ended up being, just building stuff. I've always worked with my hands in some capacity, building props and set pieces and actual sets themselves and things like that. And then just working like freelance gigs on the side whenever a project finished up and I had a little space of time. And one of those happened to be with a furniture maker in Venice, pretty close to the beach, and just kind of living this really interesting lifestyle, building furniture in his backyard and in this idyllic setting. That kind of got my wheels turning on what I actually wanted to do. After being in LA for a couple of years, my love of building things developed and grew. And I realized I didn't really need to be in LA anymore in order to build things. And I didn't have any space to build things because I was kind of crammed in a small apartment. It's kind of expensive.
Yeah.
So I ended up moving up to Portland, which is where I am now. And at the time, at least, this was 2006. You could rent a place for practically nothing. I rented a house for $500 a month. Wow. And had a 2-car garage, a nice yard. And I just started working on little projects, primarily at the time, just little stop motion projects, building small sets and stuff in the garage. Took some woodworking classes at some local schools and stuff. I was working on a tree farm to make a living at the time. Just a beautiful existence, just kind of working with my hands on the tree farm and then coming home and just working on these little creative projects.
That sounds awesome. Were the films like your own sort of like stories and everything, or were they often for other in collaboration with other people to sort of be the animator of their project?
Well, at the time, I didn't really know anybody up in Portland. I was at a point in my life where just traveling around and seeing new places interested me. So I wasn't working with anybody. I was just kind of, figuring out as much as I could just on my own, just working at night and coming up with little projects. None of them ever went anywhere. It was mostly just in an experimental phase. Right around that time, there was a stop motion animation studio in town that was going from being kind of a small commercial type studio to funding its first feature film. And that happened to be Coraline. I don't know if you ever saw that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were crewing up for that at the time. I caught wind of it and just applied, a million times until they finally gave me the time of day and called me back. I was showing up at their door and, hey, can I have a job? And I had enough of a resume having worked in LA for a couple of years where they kind of gave me a crack and just hired me on. And I was lucky in the timing of that because it was kind of the Wild West at that company at the time. It was very early days. People were coming from around the world who had all sorts of relevant experience to work on a stop motion puppet feature.
Mm-hmm.
And what I ended up falling into was the puppet making itself. So if anyone's not familiar with stop motion, it's actual 3D animation. So you're working with physical objects.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a physical set and it's just a miniature world and the characters are anywhere from a couple inches to a couple feet tall. And so I ended up finding my way into making the armatures for the puppets. And that's basically like an articulated metal skeletal frame.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So essentially it's miniature precision metal work, which is what I ended up doing for about 10 years.
Wow.
And, working with a crew of 50 to 60 people just in the puppet department and maybe, I don't know, anywhere from 5 to 10 at any given time in armature building itself. Probably even more than that at certain times.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, I imagine that must be really intricate. And so just the amount of time it must take for each one. And would you also be like sort of operating, or would that be somebody else's job?
So there's a whole team of animators that specialize in that and are extremely talented, and kind of like taking these little lifeless figures and making them have these performances that you see on the screen when you watch these movies.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's almost so good that, when you watch a movie like Coraline, a lot of people don't even realize it's puppets because it's so smooth. It's hard to believe that it's a puppet that's being moved a frame at a time.
Yeah.
The process is you have this puppet on a stage and you move it a fraction of an inch, step back, take a frame, come back in, move it again. And it's
to
an
be able to
amazingly
have
intricate.
to have like the ability to sort of just, I feel like I would get like halfway through and not even halfway, probably like a second through and just be like, I forget what I was doing next for this movement. Like, it just seems like you'd have to be able to tie together the next thing. So, I mean, that level of skill and patience is really incredible.
Yeah. It's an amazing skill set.
Mm-hmm.
And, they have all sorts of tricks. They'll act out the scene like in front of a camera themselves and then use that as reference. There's all these different tricks that they use. It takes 24 still frames, like I just described, to make a single second of footage.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine over the course of an hour and a half long movie. But I mean, it was an incredible job. Got to work with a very fun, talented group of people and would have to work pretty closely with the animators to understand the shot they were doing, the performance demands that they would need out of the puppet. People are sculpting these figures and then molding that sculpt, making the skeletal structure, and then having to cast all sorts of foam and silicone materials over that, and then a whole costume department and paint department, and really kind of fascinating stuff.
Yeah. I feel like anything to do with animation, like just once you start to get it, like just lift the surface and see just like the huge teams that are involved with making all of that possible. It's like one of the most fascinating things for sure.
Yeah. You watch the credits roll at the end of one of those things. And
it's just like,
look at these people possibly have been doing. It might not seem like it, but the amount of skills that I learned in that job that are directly relevant to guitar making, is pretty clear crossover that that might not be obvious at first, but I feel like that's kind of where my guitar making training began, is just learning how to build high precision things and jig making, and to be able to document your work enough to track it over time and repeat things when you need to do duplicates and things like that. Building this thing that's ultimately going to go on and be handed off to somebody to create a performance with. And in the case of animation, that's to make this little puppet come to life on screen. But in guitar making, building this thing that's going to be passed on to somebody with a different skill set to kind of like breathe life into it and just have it culminate in that performance at the end. So
yeah, those parallels are totally there. That really makes a lot of sense. So during this whole time, well, not the whole time, but like your guitar making sort of started and overlapped with your animation experience, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, another little boost into woodworking. After Coraline, since that was the first feature film that company made, there was this period of time where they kind of let everybody go because they weren't sure how it was going to do, whether they were going to do a second one and keep the thing alive or what. And this was around 2008. And so at the time, I'd kind of fallen in love with woodworking enough where that was my plan B. I thought I'll go try to get a job at a custom furniture shop. But 2008, the economy wasn't doing that well at the time. And so, I'd show up with a resume and they'd say, we just laid off 5 people last week.
No.
Don't expect a call, but we'll take your resume sort of thing.
Yeah.
What I ended up doing is building a teardrop camping trailer. I don't know if you're familiar with those things.
Oh, cool.
It was a crazy project to take on. It was far beyond my capabilities at the time. Even now, I don't know how I pulled it off, but that was the first major project that I took on as a woodworker and as a builder in general. And so I built this camping trailer from the ground up, and it had a little sleeping galley with some cabinets, and then in the back a little hatch with a kitchen and stuff.
Oh, cool.
So that kind of really dug me deeper into the woodworking interest. Ended up getting hired back onto the next movie, which was Paranorman. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I haven't seen that one.
Eventually, a friend of mine, Patrick, this guy who had come out from North Carolina to build puppets, brilliant guy, used to make some really amazing stuff, still does, Patrick Zung. He and I caught wind of this guitar building course that was being taught at Mount Hood Community College. And so he and I signed up for that. He's a guitar player too. He plays in metal bands and stuff like that. We signed up for this class just as a fun thing to do. And kind of the light bulb went off. And I realized this is the thing that I want to do. That was my first introduction to even, the concept of guitar building. It wasn't really something I had even thought that people did. Obviously, people did, but, something that I could do, I guess.
Yeah, that's crazy that was, I mean, I guess that's always the case for some things, but that was you hadn't even really thought about it before then. And then that was just kind of clicked in.
Yeah, I'm very lucky that I kind of stumbled into that because it's one of those things where you kind of go through your life wondering what you're going to do and trying different things. And I had found this great thing that I was really enjoying, but there was this other thing kind of just sitting there in the wings that was a slight kind of jump from where I was to where I eventually realized I wanted to go. Yeah.
And so how intensive was that course and how long did it last?
It was one semester, I think maybe 10 classes. We were taught, it's this local builder, Dan Biasca, who teaches that class. And I think he's still teaching it. But, he works you through the fundamentals of building an acoustic guitar, just the basic tools that you need, building the mold, coming up with your shape, doing all the things you need to kind of assemble an acoustic guitar. It's called acoustic guitar construction. And guitar building is one of those things where a lot of people build guitars and you can build a really nice little guitar just from learning the fundamentals. And then it's kind of a lifetime challenge to optimize that device and to build it as efficiently as possible as a sound generator. In that class, John Greven, local legend builder, came in one night to kind of try out this lecture that he was going to be given at the 2011 GAL convention that was coming up. And so he came and he practiced his presentation. And that just kind of introduced me to what even the goal is for a custom guitar maker. And so that was extremely inspiring. I kept in touch with John. He's had me over his place and taught me all sorts of stuff. And then went to that convention. The GAL is the Guild of American Luthiers, for people wondering. Any, budding guitar makers, I recommend checking that out. They have a quarterly magazine and you can sign up with them as a member. They have conventions every 2 or 3 years, and ended up going to the 2011 convention. It's in Tacoma, Washington, which is where they're headquartered. And just went to these extremely inspiring workshops by, some of the legends. John Greven gave 2 presentations. Charles Fox was there. He gave a presentation on his workflow and his jigs. He's kind of one of the legendary jig masters. Kent Carlos Everett gave a presentation on his evolution of his workshop setups. So you could I got a little bit of a glimpse into kind of the life of a guitar maker.
Yeah,
and
like how things get done.
Yeah, how it's like a constantly evolving process. You never have the perfect jig.
Yeah.
Unless you do. And then, there's always something that is shifting or improving. And, it's part of the fun of the job, just this constant process of refinement. Just kind of dug myself deeper into the guitar making hole or climbing the guitar making mountain, maybe a positive spin on that.
Yeah.
Decided, I really want to dig deeper into this thing. One of the ways to do that, John Greven started working with George Groon down in Nashville back in the day as one of his repair guys. And I stumbled upon Frank Ford's website, frets.com or .net or whatever it is. Huge respect for the repair people out in the world, because they're kind of the backbone of this whole thing, keeping the engine in tune. You always hear repair people talk about things that they come across that they see a guitar going through over time, and how that kind of informs the design process and kind of informs things that you should be thinking about out of the gate. Because these things go out into the world, but then they have the life that they live, and you want to prepare for that in your designs as best you can.
Yeah, I feel like the luthiers who have a good background in repair are often the most, they're realistic, obviously, because they know what a guitar is going to go through. But I feel like that's such an important process to have been a part of. And I think if anybody skimps on that, I think that's probably to the detriment of their instruments in the long term.
Yeah, I think what ends up happening is you end up learning repair by kind of fixing your own mistakes over time, which is, a completely valid way to learn. And I've certainly done my share of that.
But it's good to have spent that time seeing what mistakes other people made, and then you can sort of kind of prepare for that in the first place. So that's really valuable experience.
So I ended up stumbling into this place in town called Eastside Guitar Repair, which is run by this local repair guy, Ryan Lynn. Really great repair guy, old Roberto Vengrad from the 90s. And he was kind enough to take me in for a Saturday shift. And for a couple of years, I was working with him, just helping him just with some basic setup and repair stuff, and also just kind of prepping for more extensive repairs, and then just being able to peek over his shoulder and ask questions as he was doing some of the more intricate stuff.
Forgot to talk about your musical background. So you obviously played a little bit in high school and college.
Yeah, got my first guitar for my 16th birthday. Kind of hit it pretty hard as a teenager. I probably played more in the first 5 years of playing than I'll play for the rest of my life. Had a little bar band in college and stuff like that. But soon after that became kind of a fun, casual thing that I mess around with, mostly on my own, just in my living room sort of thing, and occasionally with friends.
Do you listen to a lot of guitar-centric music still, or are you kind of not really necessarily devoted specifically to listening to Tommy Emmanuel or the kind of the guitar greats?
There's all sorts of great guitar in the music that I listen to, but it's not really in the world that I'm operating in as a builder. Kind of a separate thing.
Yeah. Do you listen to more rock music, or music that's more electric driven, or more acoustic?
It's kind of all over the place. Sturgill Simpson, I like to listen to a lot. Hayes Carl's a guy that I like. Kurt Weill, Black Keys, Ty Segall. There's this girl I came across recently, Nilüfer Yanya. I don't know if you've heard her music at all. It's kind of all over the place. I'll hear something on Spotify and just kind of go down that rabbit hole and just switch around the place. I listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm working too.
Yeah. Cool. So aside from, I totally forgot to ask you about your apprenticeship with Ervin Somogyi. When did that come into play?
Well, the more I got into it, I at some point wanted to learn more and more and more, and came across Ervin Somogyi as a guy who is obviously a legend in the field, and found out that he had these 2 books that he had written, and picked those up, and those things just kind of blew the doors open on what was possible and how much people have learned about guitar making and what makes these things tick, and also the artistic side of it, just the visual side of it. So I became completely glued to those books, and would spend all my free time reading them and taking notes and all that stuff. And at some point along the way, I don't even remember how I learned that he occasionally takes on an apprentice. And that just kind of intrigued me to no end. I think at the time I didn't imagine that would ever be something that I ended up having the opportunity to do. But Ervin's work and his writing, just really inspired me and took my interest to another level. And I reached out to him one day just on a whim, and we kind of started a back and forth. anyone who's ever emailed with Ervin knows that he likes to write. And
yeah.
he's
very imaginative and can really he's a very unique writer.
Yeah. Also very generous with his time and knowledge. One thing led to another. I inquired about the apprenticeship program, and for the people who've done it, that when you kind of get to a point where that's a consideration, he sends you like this 15-page document kind of outlining what the apprenticeship is, what his expectations are, what it would require from you, and steps that need to be taken in order to even get to the point where that's something that might happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so that involves sending him a letter of intent sort of thing, photographs of what you've done in the past, what your hopes are for guitar making, what your hopes are for studying with him specifically, all this stuff. And so that eventually led to him inviting me down to do like a formal interview for that, which is a 2-week process where you go and you stay in the shop.
Oh, wow.
You just kind of crash on the couch and just live in the shop for 2 weeks. And he just runs you through your paces physically and psychologically, just to kind of see if you're a good fit for the shop with him, with the other apprentices, because there's always an overlap of 2 or 3 people. And then you need to be in a position to be able to do it, because it's a long-term commitment. It's unpaid. And it's in Oakland, which is one of the most expensive places to live on the planet. And so by the time you get to that point, it's almost a self-selecting process. Do you want it enough? And are you in a position in your life where you're able to pull it off? And do you have the relevant skill set, or at least the aptitude to be able to thrive in that environment?
Right. And is it a typical, is there a length of time that he generally kind of sets it out to be, like very kind of programmatic, or does it vary by person and sort of what their goals are and how long they can really afford to be there?
It's generally the same, but there's some logistical considerations. So international people who want to come over from other countries are limited by the U.S. government at 2 years, because the type of visa they need to come over and do it is only 2 years long. If you're from the U.S. and you don't have that restriction, he asks for a minimum of 2.5 years. And
oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that long.
Yeah. And, you're living in Oakland, and it's a fully immersive experience. You're doing a pretty big deep dive into the world of Luthier and into Ervin's world, because you're working in his shop with him and with the other apprentices, learning how to become a guitar maker and everything that entails. I mentioned that other class being kind of like learning the fundamentals. This is kind of learning. You're kind of expected to already have that stuff under your belt by the time you get there, and it's then kind of breaking it down on a granular level and really getting into the finer details of how do you make this thing as responsive as possible, and taking all of the factors into consideration and refining it to the point where is hopefully a world-class instrument. Yeah.
Wow. That's so intense. And was it just like basically, I mean, obviously full-time, I would assume, but is it like more than full-time, or like do a lot of folks work jobs on the side and kind of have to split their time, or does it kind of vary again per person just based on what they can sort of take on?
As far as I'm aware, nobody who was there when I was there did that. I mean, I don't honestly see how you could do that. It's so intense. I don't see how anyone would really have the ability to do that. Maybe it's happened. I'm not sure. Because the thing is, you're working in the apprenticeship and working for Ervin and working on his guitars and learning from him, but also you're expected to be, and you want to be, working on your own stuff. Developing your own designs, kind of taking what you're learning in real time and applying it to your own work and practicing and going through that process.
Not really giving your brain the opportunity to check out and like revert back. Like it's better sometimes just to be all in and fully immersed like that. Yeah.
And I want to give a shout out to Chris Morimoto, who's a former Somogyi apprentice who kind of stayed on in Ervin's shop and works there and helps out a lot with the guitars and with the apprenticeship. And anyone who's gone through that program, I'm sure will agree that we all owe a great deal of gratitude and respect to Chris. And I've learned an incredible amount from him. And he was always a solid kind of touchstone to bounce stuff against. And yeah, shout out to Chris.
Nice. Yeah, it's those kind of like those quieter people who sometimes maybe don't necessarily put as much out, but yeah, he sounds like he needs a little bit more attention for his work in the wider world. So your main model that you make now is the OM. Are there any specific like bracing patterns or construction techniques that you came upon during that time frame that are distinctive to your guitar?
I very much build in the style of Ervin, kind of with my own twist here and there on certain components. Ervin really advocates for symmetrical bracing pattern and thinking of the top as a unit. There are different theories about the 2 Martin offset tone bars and the lower bout. Some people build asymmetry intentionally into the top. We could go down all sorts of rabbit holes with this.
Yeah.
I essentially use Ervin's bracing pattern and follow his kind of theoretical understanding of how a guitar creates sound and how to best brace it and voice it, and to do that kind of critical dance with mass and stiffness.
I mean, Ervin's really known for his really imaginative and creative inlay and rosette designs. Yours are like totally on par with that in terms of being really I don't want to say unusual, but like you wouldn't necessarily expect the things that you do with your inlay and your aesthetic appointments. Did you kind of come into a lot of that while you were there, or was there influence from the animation days that kind of played into your inlays and stuff like that?
I was definitely influenced by being there and kind of seeing, some of anyone familiar with Ervin's work, he's got some extremely intricate, really mind-blowing type of inlay detail work and stuff. And I think coming out of the gate, I was really pushing that sort of thing, partially just to see what I could come up with and just as a fun experiment, and really trying to develop my own visual style, which I don't think I really had. I'm still continuing to figure out for myself what my own visual style even is. It's kind of, I feel like I'm still at the beginning stages of exploring that. But one thing you bump up against is just efficiency. In order to make some of these more intricate designs, it takes time and energy just to come up with them, and then to figure out, once you have kind of a conceptual idea of what you want to do, then it's like, well, how do I even do this? And that's a whole other process. And those things take time. And unless you're charging a lot of money for your guitars, like Somogyi level money, you quickly bump into just that trade-off between kind of following your wildest design ideas and efficiency, because you need to get guitars out the door and figure out how to put food on the table.
Yeah.
I'm really lucky I ended up in Oakland during that period, because one of the things I became drawn to, and still am, is like graffiti art and just mural art. I would walk to the shop, and just the amount of really high level artwork that you see just on the side of a building or just in underpasses on the freeway and things like that, especially with color, I find that to be extremely inspiring. I drive my girls to daycare along this stretch of road that's parallel to a rail line. And so there's constantly freight trains passing as we're driving back and forth. And that's an incredible kind of canvas for graffiti artists. And so occasionally I'll be at a train crossing, just kind of taking pictures of cars going by and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's cool. That really makes a lot of sense, because you do use color in a way that not a lot of other folks do. It seems like everyone that I've seen so far has been pretty different, and it doesn't seem like you repeat yourself too much.
I don't know if you've seen, it's kind of like a micro mosaic tile thing. I've done, I think, 3 of those.
Okay.
I'm not opposed to doing repeat stuff if people are interested in it. I'm also trying more to, I don't necessarily want to be known as an inlay person. It's one thing that I'm interested in, but the visual aspect of guitar is just one aspect of it. And it's funny. I think Ervin, for people who haven't actually played one of his guitars, they think of him as kind of a visual guitar maker. The aesthetics are so prominent, but when you actually pick one up, it's like, oh, this is a beautiful instrument. It also sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes not having it be like necessarily an artistic canvas, but focusing more on it being an instrument, that's something I also do. And some of the guitars that I've made and hope to continue making are just a little bit more simple and refined. I like to be able to do both.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it seems like there's like a really big split between the folks who are like just strictly the really understated, almost Scandinavian aesthetic versus the more visual stuff. But yeah, I think like the one that you sent us, I feel like strikes a good balance of being very much kind of focused on the woods itself, and like you play it and it's amazing. But then there's just that rosette was just so unusual, but it's not super flashy or anything like that. It just adds like such an interesting touch.
Yeah, it's something that, thank you. It's a challenge to experiment with colors and things like that without it becoming overwhelming or distracting or something. So.
The other thing that I think is like so interesting about your work in particular is you got to focus on using non-tropical hardwoods and more sustainable wood sources. And your core model, your offerings are myrtle and walnut. And so what was your sort of driving factor in terms of making that decision to focus on those tone woods versus going after the Brazilian rosewoods and all the kind of more typical stuff? Was that informed by your experience at the tree farm, or is it informed by a desire to be more sustainable and eco-conscious?
Yeah, I think the latter. It's such a complex topic. It could warrant a whole series of podcasts in and of itself. Yeah. There are a lot more people who are more expert in this topic than I am. When I bought my first wood for my first guitar, it was from a guy down here in Southern Oregon who's built a lot of really great acoustic guitars and acoustic basses. And it's a focus of his that he talks a lot about on his website. His name's Dave Mays. And it's something I hadn't really thought about at that point when I was first starting out, but that kind of planted the initial seed in my mind. And so kind of early on, I thought, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We have all these options for tone woods. Seems like a good idea to use some that aren't on the endangered species list.
Yeah.
And so I do use some tropical hardwoods, but there are some that I prefer just based on their conservation status. And so I decided to just kind of make that call out of the gate. Ervin has been very encouraging of it from the get-go, and I think would like to be able to experiment a little bit more in his own builds, but he feels that people expect primarily Brazilian rosewood when they order a guitar from him.
Yeah.
Because there's kind of a inherited perception that's come down through the generations. There's kind of a hierarchy of tone woods that people have in their minds that I don't think is necessarily based on reality as much as it's based on a number of other factors. It's a very complex issue. But Ervin told me many times when we would talk about this sort of thing, he would say, be very mindful of the choices that you make when you first introduce yourself to the general public, because those will be the things that you become known for. And then the things you become known for will be the things that people will want and expect from you. Because of course they will. That's what you're advertising. The people who are drawn to you for the things you're putting out there. Yeah. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to choose to build with the things I want to build with, and that will draw people to me who are open to and interested in those things. When I made that decision, I don't know that I necessarily understood what that would entail. And it's ended up kind of pushing me in directions that I wouldn't have otherwise gone, that I'm really glad to have gone in. Again, like I was saying earlier about something else, just kind of having a set of parameters to work within sometimes forces you into kind of corners that you need to creatively work yourself out of.
Yeah.
Luckily, there are all sorts of great woods that make great guitars. And I mean, wood is it's not like metal or plastic where you can draw kind of hard conclusions about its properties just based on its classification.
Yeah. It's so much more. I feel like I ran into that making all these videos about like Cocobolo and like trying to sum it up. And then a month later, you're like, I totally overgeneralized about this or that, because there is so much variation.
There's a ton of variation within a species, but also when I first started learning about guitars, if you were to create a pie chart of what factors in a guitar end up leading to how that guitar sounds, I had the impression the back and side species would take up like half the pie, but in reality, it's such a complex system, and the species of the back and side woods is really just a tiny sliver of a slice out of that pie in terms of contributing factors to how a guitar ends up, which I didn't know at the time when I made that decision, but I'm glad that it's true.
Yeah.
I'm also following the lead of some builders who've come before me that have really blazed a path in these directions, like Alan Carruth out of New Hampshire, John Arnold over in Tennessee, John Calkin, who was a Huss and Dalton guy for a long time and really liked to experiment with woods. And, some of the wood suppliers who have a deep knowledge of this stuff, guys like Chris Herod at LMI. I'm kind of just focusing on building guitars out of the woods that I want. putting them out into the world, getting them into the hands of great players, having them record with them, and then just kind of letting that speak for itself. And I've been very happy with the results I've gotten with how my guitars are sounding. And I don't think they necessarily reflect some of the thoughts that a lot of people have about some of the tonewoods I'm using. And you see more and more people experimenting and being open to trying different things. And I think that'll continue over time.
Yeah. I'm glad that I had the chance to put your guitar into both Carl's and Gareth Pearson's hands just to hear what they both did with it. Because I mean, Gareth is such that video, he plays Black Mountain Rag, and he's so like an absolute firecracker, like just constant stream of notes. But like that guitar actually holds up really well to that. It's got a directness and a clarity that not every guitar would be like a guitar that you would choose for that. So it was so interesting to hear it in those two different settings and to just find out what could be done with that combination.
Yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't say I was pleasantly surprised to see how well it held up to that. Because he was driving it.
Yeah,
and I was like, oh man, it holds up. And
yeah, and then it still sounds amazing being played more openly and with more sustain. And yeah, like they both did such great jobs. And I'll splice in both demos into this interview. And
then there's the third demo that Bryan Rahija did here in my shop. That is one fingerstyle album that I've listened to kind of on repeat over the past year. It's his album Timber.
Yeah, he was such a great discovery to get to find through your work, because he's such a fabulous guitarist, and we've got I think similar taste in terms of what we like. So he's posted a few things where I'm like, I love that so much too.
Yeah, nice.
Well, what's next for you after this? Do you have any shows coming up this summer or fall?
I'm doing the Woodstock show for the first time in October. So I'm excited about that. I've been wanting to do that show for years and be flying out for that. And actually, speaking of tonewoods, I'm building my first guitar with a Douglas fir top. That's going to be on my table at that show.
Oh, very cool. And, awesome.
Yeah, it's actually in finish right now, so it's pretty far down the line, and I'm really excited to hear it get strung up.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get to go too and get to meet you in person and check out all your other guitars, because I would just so love to get to play more of your guitars.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we don't have, like I said, the one that you sent us is already sold, but people who are interested in working with you can purchase a bespoke slot with us and get to custom order a guitar from you and pick out all the tonewoods and all the fun stuff. So if anybody's interested, they can reach out to us about that. But I think that's it. This has been such a nice chat with you, and I so appreciate your time.
Yeah, right back at you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Talking Guitar. Sadly, our first Gaiero sold the second we received it this summer, but we can help you order your own custom guitar from Mark anytime. Currently, he offers a mid-sized OM, available in his core model offerings of walnut or myrtle, plus Sitka or Engelmann, though custom options include one of the widest selections of uncommon tonewoods you'll probably ever see. To learn more about Mark and all of our fabulous builders, come visit us at thenorthamericanguitar.com. Until next time.